Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, it's beautiful outside. It's my lunchtime, but instead of eating lunch, I am talking to you nice people. I've been talking to a group of friends recently about character. What makes a character a character? What exactly does character mean? And this has been an interesting discussion because part of the reasoning behind it is sometimes, people come up with, they say the word character, but often if you talk to them long enough, you realize they mean different things. And this is just another one of those places, as I've talked about in the past, where we can have misunderstandings with each other because we mean slightly different things, or maybe even radically different things. So, why is this relevant? We'll get to this. I was really happy this morning to see that Robert the Narraider had responded to a recent video I made about mechanics affecting character choices. And I was happy because I always like to engage with Robert. That's always a lot of fun. And I hope that I get to play with him again because that was a lot of fun. He's a great guy. So check out his channel, Confessions of a Frustrated Game Master. I was also happy because somebody was paying attention and wanted to ask some questions. And he asked some really good questions. And it made me happy because after I made that video and posted it on YouTube, I made another video in this group and went into some more depth about what I found during that moment where I made those character choices and my reasoning behind it. And I wished I'd put more of that into the YouTube video. I wanted to talk about this a little bit more. So now I get my chance because Robert's asked these great questions. And so let me put this into context, and I will hopefully link that video to this in Robert's video when I get a moment. Put this into context or give you an idea. Something from my own life, an analogy. Some years ago, right around the time that I disappeared from making YouTube videos for a while in 2012, I had a radical change in my life, and part of what changed was how I viewed a lot of things. And I for lack of a better word, became more interested in some spiritual principles, we'll call them. And a good friend of mine actually lives by this one mantra, which I've kind of adopted a little bit, or a lot, which is, what does contact with me produce? And it becomes very important to me, like, in what condition do I leave the souls around me as I interact with them? Is it a good influence or a bad influence? I'm more, how are my actions affecting me? The consequences to me and other people around me have become a lot more important. I've become much more cognizant of these consequences. And so, on a good day, I live my life in a different manner, trying to keep those consequences, hard word to say, in mind, especially when you're hungry. So let's get back to these character choices, because Robert asked, was I metagaming at that moment where I looked at the mechanics of Mithras versus something like the mechanics of Hollow Earth Expedition? And I'm playing Mithras, so I'm playing my character differently because injury is far more likely. Real debilitating injury, different consequences. The short answer is yes, kind of. However, there was more to it than that. And the second question, I believe, was should we modulate the decisions our characters make based on the consequences or based on the system? And I'll leave that question just hanging because I don't have a real good answer for that. And it depends on what your intention is. If your intention is to game the system or to seek an advantage, which there's nothing wrong with that if that's your intention, then of course you should exploit those things and figure that sort of stuff out. However, I'll give you a real fast snapshot of the situation. The situation was we had created these characters for this Mithras mythos game. Hard to say. It is not Call of Cthulhu, but we're using the Mithras rules. They're D100 rules. The point of that is that injuries can be real and debilitating, as opposed to something like Hollow Earth Expedition, Ubiquity, something like Dungeons and Dragons, where injury is much more abstract and you heal from it much faster. And there tends not to be the same level of effect. And we're instructed to create characters in a certain way. I created a character that was kind of like Indiana Jones. I even laughed and said, hey, make sure I'm not creating the wrong character and bringing the wrong character to the table. And engaging in some character poisoning or genre poisoning. And so far I've been told, no, this is okay. So the guy is not quite Indiana Jones, but he's a field archaeologist. He's a competent guy. He's a bit of not a thrill seeker, but he's able to handle himself in those sorts of situations. But here we are in a bar, trying to sell some goods that we've robbed from a grave to a collector, and this very big man comes up and wants these items back. Now, if we were playing Hollow Earth Expedition, I said my first instinct was to throw the urn at him, say catch, and run away with the rest of the goods. And you can hear the music in the background. But in this particular case, I decided not to do that. And partly it was because the consequences were different. Now, part of that probably was a little bit of metagaming. However, getting back to what is a character, what makes up a character? What we found as we were talking in this group, part of what intrudes into character or can influence who the character is the mechanics, the system itself, how it works. I wasn't necessarily making those decisions for my character not to engage in pulp heroics because of the genre, because we've already talked about the particular genre we're playing. We're not trying to, as players, playing those characters, portray Casper, Milquetoast, Shrinking Violets, academics, who are eventually going to come into contact with the mythos and be driven insane. We're playing very competent people who will probably come into contact with the mythos and being driven insane. Muhammad's not going to the mountain. The mountain is being brought to us. We're waiting for that to happen. So we're interacting with mundane things at this point. So my decisions were not made to enforce genre, although that's important. What influenced how I viewed Zachary Bishop, my character in this particular case, is that the consequences for him would be different in this particular game due to the mechanics. And you think about this. You think about John McClane in Die Hard. You think about Han Solo. You think about The Unstoppable Barton in the Damo trilogy by F.M. Busby. I think I actually made a video about that book one time. Said Indiana Jones, Sky Captain in The World of Tomorrow. All the pulp heroes, even like Philippe Moreau in our All for One campaign. Even a D&D fighter, 5th level D&D fighter in a brawl. The consequences for them are different than they are in a game that models more realistic injury, like Mithras or several other games. These characters in fiction, forget role-playing games entirely, but just in fiction, these characters act in a certain way because of the genre. They act in a certain way. They view consequences differently than you and I would view consequences in those situations where it's very dangerous, where you're getting beat up, the building is exploding all around you, you're running from the bullets, all this sort of thing. Indiana Jones, John McClane, etc., they view consequences differently because in a very real way, the consequences that exist for you and I simply don't exist for them. They have a different set of consequences. And because of that, they make decisions in a different way. And so that, I found, affected a little bit who Zachary Bishop was. Do I still view Zachary Bishop the same way in this Mithras game that I would if I'd been playing in Hollow Earth Expedition? Yes. Just like for me, all the things that make Ivan, Brian Gregory and I were kind of, poking each other a little bit in this discussion about what makes a character, playing gadfly with each other, posing some difficult questions. We really agree that, for us, and this is a preference thing, what makes up a character is the personality, the motivations, all those things that you think of, what makes up me? What makes up Ivan? All that sort of stuff. That has remained, for me, mostly consistent throughout my life. My motivations may have changed, some viewpoints, but the essential ingredients that make up Ivan haven't changed all that much. Just like the essential ingredients that make up Zachary Bishop really won't change if I play him in Hollow Earth Expedition or if I play him in this Mithras game. However, the mechanics, the nature of the consequences that this person will face changes how that character, not just me, but how the character views consequences, how they view the choices they make. And that I found very fascinating, that at that particular point, the mechanics themselves influenced the character choices. So it wasn't just metagaming. It was, in a very real way, forgive this for getting esoteric, but it struck me that way. The character themselves has changed a little bit. There's that one little part of the character's personality which is now different because the consequences that exist for them are different. I found that very, very fascinating. So that is my long answer to Robert the Narrator's question, but I thought it was a great question. Just, for me, I tend to view consequences a little bit differently nowadays in my own life. That's not a fair analogy because the consequences are the same either way, but I'm more cognizant of them. In this particular case, though, the consequences that exist for the characters are different. Consequences that are, exist for Han Solo are not the consequences that exist for you and I. So the character has been changed just a little bit. So I found that really interesting, really compelling, and I'm glad that Robert kind of picked up on that and asked some more questions about that. So was it metagamey? Kind of, but not really. There was more going on, and hopefully we'll talk more about character in the future because it's a fascinating subject. All right, well, I'm going to eat some lunch because I'm hungry. Have a good one, kids.